Well, hello everybody. Here's another one of my questions for the yes or no treatment. And it's, was Mrs. Thatcher good for Britain? Oh my, that's going to get some people excited. She was the sort of person that really stirred up passions on both sides, probably more against than for, but she was certainly a historically interesting person in the history of British politics. She grew up, as I guess most people know, in Grantham. Her father was a storekeeper, a grocer, had some other retail interests. He was an alderman in the town. But she grew up with this very kind of Protestant ethic way of thinking about you have to look after yourself. The individual is responsible for his own welfare, and you have to make your own way in the world and all that kind of thing. And it certainly impacted her politics and her whole worldview. She was very bright. She got a scholarship after grammar school to Oxford. She graduated from Oxford with a science degree, the first woman ever to graduate from Oxford with a science degree. She went on then and qualified as a barrister, ran for Parliament, became the leader of the Conservative Party in 1975, which she retained until 1990 when she resigned. And she was the Prime Minister from 1979 to 1990. She was elected in a landslide after Britain had great economic problems during the 1970s, promising a new approach to its problems. And she had sort of ups and downs of popularity, rejection, and so forth, because she took very tough measures with the economy and with the social fabric of the country. She presided over the liberalization of a lot of industry. She denationalized much industry. She presided over the so-called Big Bang in the City of London, which broke up a lot of the cartels that existed in the old kind of old boy network of the City of London. She went to war with the unions and restricted their ability to call strikes, for which, of course, she was vilified in many quarters. So she was an activist. She did a lot of things to improve the economy and basically got some pretty good results, certainly compared to the situation the country had been in during the 1970s. She, in 1982, encountered the Argentines in the Falkland Islands, went to war and won. Some say it was a close run thing. It probably would have been the end of her career, perhaps, if Britain had to retreat ignominiously from that experience. But in any case, it was a resounding victory, and she was heroic. A couple of years later, there was an assassination attempt by the IRA, the so-called Brighton bombing. She wasn't hurt, but many others were, including one of her cabinet ministers. And in any case, she still continued very strongly until she decided on a poll tax as a way of making sure those who were able to vote were aware of how important the privilege was and that they should pay for it. And that was a big mistake. There were riots in London and so forth, and it basically brought her down. She had to resign. She lost the confidence of her party. She had to resign in 1990, left Downing Street tearfully. She was subsequently ennobled, became Dame Margaret Thatcher in the House of Lords. She eventually didn't fare too well in old age. She acquired dementia, as has been well known, and she finally died in the Ritz Hotel, in a suite in the Ritz Hotel, at age 87. So that's Margaret Thatcher. Definitely an activist person. In some respects, identified as the most powerful woman in the world. Many magazines put her at the top of the list of great influencers and so forth. So she was a major factor in the 1980s in Britain and in the world. So let's examine some of what was going on here. Those who support her, the people would say yes, Margaret Thatcher was good for Britain. What are their arguments? Well, I suppose most of all, as happens with so many other people who follow on kind of failed leftist governments, she took credit for saving the country. She, as I noted before, went through a great deal of removal of the most onerous of the Labour Party's restrictions on the economy, most particularly reducing the top rate of income tax from an unbelievable 98%. I think that was on investment income, and even on earned income it was in the 70s, I think, down to 40%. What a huge difference that made. And it was a signal, basically, to the world that she wanted entrepreneurship, she wanted people to get out there and work hard and create and so forth, and that was symbolic of much of what she stood for. Again, a lot of people were opposed to such a move. There were many people who basically hated the rich and wanted them to feel the pain, and so they did. Well, she decided to put an end to that and received the everlasting thanks of those for whom she did it. In her invective about socialism and in favor of capitalism, she had some memorable sound bites, one of which is, "There's no such thing as public money, only taxpayers' money." Certainly got a message across with that one. And in that regard, there were some great benefits from privatization of a lot of industries and restructuring of industry. In my professional life back as a management consultant, I encountered a few of the vestiges of the old school of public sector businesses, and they were pretty horrendous. So there were some big improvements made in that area. Again, of course, resulting in a lot of lost jobs and redundancies and so forth. So it was a tough time for many people, but certainly the service to the consumer of many of these services improved. Many people will even argue with that. She was a big activist and perhaps even surprisingly advocate for the rights of gay people, and supported the famous decriminalization of homosexuality, with which a lot of people didn't agree. So in that sense, she was more of a modern person than you might think. She was a strong anti-communist. Her premiership, of course, coincided with that of Ronald Reagan in the White House, and together they formed a bond about their opposition to the excesses of communism, especially in the Soviet Union and China, and for many people that was a good policy to get started in Britain. There were perhaps too many appeasers, perhaps even in the old days of the Labour Party, even support for communism. There were certainly questions about whether Harold Wilson himself was in any way compromised by his trips to Russia and his affiliation with kind of left-wing political movements. So that was an important thing for many people. She was quite a supporter of environmentalism and spoke often about the apparent incipient arrival of climate change and how something had to be done about that. So she at least made the nation aware of the issue, if only in the early days of recognizing the seriousness of it. She was kind of on the right side of that one. And finally, she was quite against the expansion of the European Union. She viewed it as as a cumbersome, self-serving bureaucracy, and especially opposed the creation of a common currency. She fought with her advisors about entering the European exchange rate mechanism. Her chancellor resigned over that, and she held fast. That policy was changed after she resigned by her successor, John Major, who had been the Treasury Secretary and who has always been pro-Europe and pro-Euro and so forth. But that was her position, for which many people were very supportive. And with hindsight, she had the foresight to realize what a shambolic problem the euro would eventually wind up being for those who were part of the euro currency. So that's a pretty long list of impressive accomplishments. One can see why many people say that yes, Margaret Thatcher was good for Britain. Well, how about those who say no, she wasn't? Well, number one, she had some, what to some are kind of some unpleasant ideas. She appeared to support Enoch Powell in his famous Rivers of Blood speech, where, of course, he was inveighing against Commonwealth migration, particularly of colored people from Jamaica. And the Rivers of Blood, by the way, is a phrase that actually never actually occurred in his speech, but was a reference to a line from Virgil's Aeneid. But anyway, as those things go, nonetheless, she was taking sides with a pretty chap with a pretty tough point of view that's not easy for a lot of people to swallow. Next, she fought the pressures against grammar schools and she was against the whole comprehensive switchover. For many people, it represented a great discriminatory view against those who are less fortunate, less well educated, less well brought up, and so forth. A real negative for some. Next, some would say that her impact in the economy was not all that great, certainly not as great as has been claimed for. There were a lot of ups and downs during her premiership. There was unemployment, there were strikes, there were riots from time to time, and so the nation was kind of in tumult much of the time. Not as bad as in the 1970s, but nonetheless it was no Garden of Eden, and many feel that she was overpraised for what she did. Next, she kind of besmirched herself a bit with her affinity for some authoritarian, nasty regime. She always opposed any sort of sanctions in South Africa to bring the apartheid regime to heel, for which she was much vilified. She also was quite favorably inclined toward General Pinochet in Chile, for which you might look at my separate video. And in general, didn't see any problem with right-wing authoritarian regimes, which were really kind of something similar to what she was doing, although in more extreme form. And for many people, those were unforgivable associations. Okay, well, that's sort of the arguments against her. It was more, the arguments against her come down really more to one of being cruelly hard right, insensitive to the needs of those less fortunate to herself. An understandable position on the part of many. Well, what's my take on Margaret Thatcher? Well, we have to give Mrs. Thatcher credit for restoring kind of the rules of the economy. It didn't necessarily turn Britain into a boom town, but it was so much better than the mess that had been produced by the Labour Party during the 1970s, and the humiliating event of having to go hat in hand for a bailout to the International Monetary Fund, like some banana republic. So for that, we have to give her credit. Um, on the other hand, she offended people. I think the feeling was that she was kind of rewarding greed, selfishness, a hard-nosed authoritarian capitalist view, and indifference to inequality, as opposed to those who would advocate more of a view of compassion, of looking after the little guy, and all of that. The perpetual argument, really, between the left and the right, and she is a kind of a totem in that respect for the right. So, as you make a judgment about Mrs. Thatcher, you really have to kind of choose where you are on that. I would finally say that I think she's a politician. She was a politician that wouldn't succeed now. She was a bit too kind of doctrinaire and pompous and almost extreme in her view of the world. And for better or for worse, we've become maybe more sensitive, maybe more woke, but we probably perhaps would be less inclined to support somebody of her rhetoric and world outlook. So that's where it is. So how do I come out on Mrs. Thatcher? Mixed. A little bit of yes, a little bit of no. Okay, well, there I am. You probably can't object to that conclusion too much, but certainly a lot of people hated her, but many others were vociferous in their support for her. So a pretty interesting character in history, and certainly in the political map of Britain. Okay, hope you liked it. Give me a like, subscribe, notify, make suggestions, and so forth. And I'll see you with the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.